recording now. Here we go. We are doing it.
Nice. Well, I just want to say it's. I mean, everybody says it, I'm sure, but it's a pleasure to talk to you, man. I've been following your videos. That first one, the pastor's take on Jordan Peterson or whatever it was titled, that fell into my news feed, I think, pretty much right away, and it's exactly what I was looking for. And so I've been watching it right from day one, pretty much.
Wow, that's 2 years. Thank you. I'm the one that should be honored.
Hey man, it's been, your stuff has been extremely helpful over the last couple of years. Maybe we'll get into a bit of background and whatnot, but just, you walk around the halls of the church and people don't really, this whole Peterson phenomenon, it doesn't get talked about a lot.
Yeah.
And when you do, you kind of get some funny looks, or maybe you throw something out there, and there's a couple of Petersonians out there, but there's not a lot of people talking about it. And so it was really helpful discovering. See, I was kind of concerned, and I guess we'll get into the background, but you're in a little bit of a silo with some of this stuff. Our little corner of the internet, nobody around necessarily knows what we're talking about. So there's hypothetically a risk of wandering off into heresy by accident.
That's almost a certainty, but hopefully we won't get too far into that.
So it was just really helpful having a guy like you with your background, with your knowledge base, with similar theological upbringing and whatnot, speaking into some of this stuff and kind of serving to guide a little bit. So it was really good. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about you.
What about me? Well, I'm 35. My wife and I just had our first baby girl. Well, last year now. She's gonna be 1 next month. So
congratulations!
Thank you. It was a long time coming. We were trying to have kids for 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. So we were waiting for that little girl for a long time. So it's still, we're almost a year in, and it's still kind of surreal. It's like we're looking at her and think, man, you're here. So we were waiting for you, and now you're here.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's been really fun. So, and tiring and all the things, but it's been really good. Yeah. And you don't, at least I did not appreciate my parents until you appreciate them, but until you have your own and you think, oh, that must have been a lot of work.
Yeah.
So, but background actually similar to your family. I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and actually my mom homeschooled all of us.
Wow.
So speaking of appreciating the effort of one's parents.
Yeah.
To varying ages, we all went to school at some point. I think I stayed home the longest, and I only went to high school in grade 12, but that was our background. And growing up in the church, we went to Alliance Church here in Abbotsford, BC. Actually, I'm in the same town that what's his name? Oh, come on. The dude at the University of Fraser Valley Ron Dart.
Oh, Ron Dart,
same town as Ron Dart.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was kind of fun when I'd actually heard of him before, and so when he popped up on one of your chats, it was kind of fun to see him and say, oh, I just live down the road from that dude. So, but yeah, growing up in a Christian home, involved in church all through growing up, kind of fairly traditional evangelical upbringing. Although at the time I didn't know that it was traditional or evangelical. I just knew that it was how everybody lives, right?
Yep.
So yeah, there was that. My parents were involved in leading worship at church all through growing up. I got involved in, playing drums at youth and at church all through high school. So kind of pretty traditional, churchy background that way, which is obviously has its blessings and there, but at the same time, there's, you'd hear people coming in and having this conversion story or this, my life used to be this way and now it's, this other way. And you kind of just on the one saying, I don't really know what that's like, but right on. And so I never walked away from the church, or really, I don't want to say I didn't have doubts. I always affirmed all the propositions that we affirm. Which is, you hear Vervaeke in the background there.
That's right.
But I didn't know why I affirmed any of those things, and it didn't necessarily seem like the people around me necessarily, we just, you settle into the churchy language and everybody kind of nods along at the functions. And so, I don't know, I got into my 20s, and I've now, like I say, I'm 35, so I kind of wondered, how the heck did I not ever have a stretch of walking away from the church? But I think in my 20s, I left the church that I grew up in. My parents still go there, but went to a different, similar background church, Mennonite church, contemporary. And actually it's a fairly large church at this point, partially due to them bringing on their young adults pastor got moved to lead pastor like a decade ago, and the church has just been growing and growing. And I suppose it's sort of kind of turned into, I hate to use the term, but the mega church type of thing, which has it has strengths, but it's got its drawbacks and whatnot too. But I think it was really influential through my 20s in keeping me in the faith in some sense. Mm-hmm. But I feel like I sort of, I met my wife when I was 25, and we actually dated for 9 months and got married, which I don't necessarily recommend to people. However, we're celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, so it's worked out for us. So that was good, but that was definitely a bit of a funny backwards in hindsight. You think you're so old when you're 25 and thinking, oh my gosh, I thought I'd be married 5 years ago. I'm never going to get married. And then, so we found each other and the family backgrounds lined up, and we kind of, all the big things were on the same page. And so we sort of held hands and said, all right, let's do this thing. And, in hindsight, we got married and we didn't know each other at all. like you would in 9 months, right?
Yeah. Well, the truth is, in a marriage, you might know each other at 25, but at 35, you're both going to be different people than you were at 25. And
things change. Yeah. So it's been a real process of getting to know each other, learning each other, both, as you say, as we've been, I'm not in any way hardly the same as I was at 25.
Yeah.
Which was a big adjustment for my wife as I was sort of, transitioning into different ways of thinking and whatnot. But I think I remember actually at our wedding, I during the vows, because we wrote our own vows and whatnot, I even at the time, part of my vows was that I said I would be the spiritual leader of our home. I didn't know what I was talking about. I knew that was a thing that I was supposed to do, and that was my responsibility at the time. But again, it's just another one of the things that people say, and you kind of like,
oh yeah, that sounds right. I'll say that too.
Well, and like you kind of know it's true, but you don't really know what it looks like or how that's going to play out, or and at the time I didn't have any sense of why I believed anything I believed. So you're sort of uttering the words and I guess having some hope that the rest would get backfilled in over time or something. But I would say I probably got to I think it was around 27 where I started sort of questioning things more. I was watching Rogan's podcasts and different things like that, and I would hear a lot of what I would now consider more strongman critiques of Christianity. But at the time I thought, yeah, that's a good question. Oh, that doesn't make sense. Oh yeah, why do we do things this way? So all of these seemingly reasonable critiques of Christianity started presenting themselves, and I kind of thought, I don't have answers to any of this stuff. And it seemed sort of prudent to maybe look into that. So I kind of had I watched your video this morning, you referenced Pascal's wager, and I sort of, even at the time, I sort of had a similar take in that, well, either the stuff's true or it's not. And even at the time, I thought to myself, I know people who I consider to be very intelligent and reasoned, and surely they must have an answer to these questions that I don't have answers to, or at least maybe they will. So I sort of made a decision to just sort of ask whatever questions I had or heard of, and if this stuff was actually true, then there'd probably be good answers for it, and if it wasn't true, then there'd probably just be bad answers. And either way, I figured I should probably know that. But rather than, it's kind of interesting, I'm not sure why I did it, but even at the time I thought, like, it doesn't make sense to just walk away from this stuff because the stakes seem rather high if I don't believe it and it is true. So before I just wander off into my own little way of being, I should maybe scratch beneath the surface and kind of look into things. So, and again, that's where, our large church, what was helpful, there's a lot of educational things. I took a 2-year theology class. There's church history classes, any number of things like that. Because I didn't know where the Bible came from.
Yeah.
Or, you know, when you actually think about it, really, this dude died and was resurrected? That's what we claim? Because that's kind of a big claim. And does anyone know why we think that? Or like, we just, it says it in this book. Okay, where's the book? I didn't have any of this.
Yep. Yep.
You know,
yep.
so you sort of, and this isn't probably too unique to me, but you kind of hit a wall where you think, really, these are very big statements that we claim to believe. And so, you know, I just sort of jumped into that process of digging and learning and, you know, starting to read a little bit of Lewis and you know, any number of, you know, Gary Habermas or some church history books or different things like that. I kind of, you know, heard N.T. Wright out there, those sorts of things. And then sooner or later, I guess fast forward to 2016. And I think I even heard Peterson on a podcast previously, maybe in the October-ish, but in November when he went on Rogan that first time. You know, I liked what he had to say, but he got to that third hour when at one point he stopped and he said something about, I'm also a deeply religious person. And that kind of piqued my ears up. And I thought, oh, okay. Because I was looking for people that seemed intelligent, reasonable. And, you know, he says a lot of things that you kind of haven't heard before, but you're kind of nodding along saying, yeah, that does make sense. And so for now him to even kind of stick his toe in the fray of this Christianity stuff, although not saying a lot of things that as a Christian you kind of nod along to, but also like, but I've never heard it said like that, or yeah, I'm with you, but take one more step further. You know, he wasn't doing all the traditional churchy stuff that you hear from the pulpit. Much like you're hearing the student is he like just some kind of Christian that's just quiet on campus, or like what is? So it was a bit of a process of trying to figure out where his head was at. If he was just a quiet Christian, or what, you know, what was going on. But his stuff was, you know, getting into the biblical lecture series, and he was just giving a lot of language that I felt was really, really helpful with where I was at the time. Maybe to back up, I've always really struggled. Like I say, I've grown up in the church, but I've never been comfortable just using kind of churchy language, like, oh, you know, the Spirit was calling me to do this, or, you know, I prayed and, you know, by God's providence, this thing happened, or I talked to the Lord, and like, I couldn't do any of that stuff. Like and to her credit, my mom did a really good job of very much being that way growing up, and, you know, reading, you know, Bible stories and all this type of stuff. Shoot, in hindsight, I can really see what she was doing at the time, trying to raise her kids in this way of thinking. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But I was always uncomfortable when she would talk like that. Even though it was good, it was influential. Yeah. But I was like, yeah, but what are you talking about? Yeah. And almost up until present day, I've not been comfortable using a lot of the traditional language. And when I booked this conversation, that was one of the things that came into my mind to discuss. And I was so I've been thinking about, like, why is that? Actually, when Jonathan Pajot talked to Vervaeke that last time, he made a comment at the beginning about some of the language Vervaeke's bringing into this and how helpful it is, because a lot of the language that we in the church use, I think he said it's basically ruined. And I sort of nodded along to that. And I don't know, you know, in a sense, that seems like a little bit too strong of language, because we use that language all the time at church, and churches are, you know, it's not like Christendom is not still a big force, but so I don't know if the language is ruined per se, but that's how I've always felt. Mm-hmm, or that I couldn't utter the words, certain words, because I didn't have a high enough resolution understanding of what we were talking about. And I felt a bit funny. Maybe this is me sort of like projecting back, feeling a little bit funny about uttering this language that I didn't know what I was saying. Even if I thought it was the case, I just didn't feel comfortable saying a bunch of things that you know, if like David Fuller said when he was talking to Andrea there, that was a good video. I hadn't encountered that before you did the commentary over it. When he was actually talking to people in your church, and he would take that step further. Okay, well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Oh,
and the church people are like, yeah, no, when we use this language, that you know, it's kind of like shaking hands with someone of a different culture. Like, well, wait, how do we? even though, well, why do we do this thing that I mean, that's exactly how it is.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that the more I've thought about it, like that phenomena has caused me, given me some pause or some sort of, almost before I think, hesitation about using some of that language. But at the same time, I want to be maybe charitable in that, using another verbiage that Peterson introduced, like the low resolution, high resolution stuff, like this stuff's complicated. And it turns out it's the most complicated thing that there is. And it's just one complicated thing amongst a whole sea of complexion in the world. So an individual you can't expect somebody to have this deep theological understanding of all of these different things from just, Jim Smith down the road necessarily. So, and I suppose that's part of what's so great about Christianity is how scalable it is across from the highest of intelligence levels and the most inquisitive minds to the, guy with Down syndrome that he just believes in Jesus, and
yeah.
Which is, so I suppose it's, even though it's caused me some internal struggles, it's for sure, I think probably a good thing, and not necessarily a critique to levy at Christians that, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, because this stuff's complicated. And
well, at least they have a language. And no, that's a really good point, because that language does scale, and that scalability is, I mean, that is exactly when I look at people trying to do, well, this is it, and they have this stuff which here is, well, Christianity's worked through so many things that, yeah, there's problems with it, but there's also huge capacities within it.
Yeah, and that was one thing that you've hit on a bunch of times, is just the institutional knowledge, or knowledge isn't even necessarily the right word, but 2,000 years of sitting on the forefront of 2,000 years of Christianity behind us. We're the benefactors of all of these things that have been thought through, and sometimes all that gets to me, the individual, is this low resolution notion of, just love your neighbor, or just do, whatever the thing is. But there's so much more behind that. And just because I don't necessarily know the full history of thought that got to this point, and all I can say is, well, just have faith, and, things will, it'll work out in the way God intends, or whatever. And that can sound kind of hollow necessarily, particularly, and I tend to be a little bit on the skeptical side. I sometimes almost hear things the way the anti-theist is hearing them,
mm-hmm.
which also gives me hesitation on using certain language, because it's the same language that, I don't know. It's, I've struggled to embody some of the traditional language, but I guess that's where guys like Peterson have been so helpful in coming in and I guess coming up from the bottom in sort of backfilling sort of some of this stuff. So in some sense, that's been really helpful for me. In terms of, and just trying to figure out, well, now we've got this little baby girl, and now the question is, okay, how am I going to raise this little girl, and how am I going to help give her the tools to think properly, and to be a filter as things are coming in, and of course I'm thinking a high level in some sense, but
and you're starting with a baby,
yeah,
and so away, and then what you'll realize in a few years is that she's been learning the whole time, whether you've been intentional or not, and that's a good thing. And then there's some other things she's learned from you and your wife that are not so good. And then you'll learn that some of those things maybe aren't even learned, but somehow passed on in and it's the whole thing is just an amazing, miraculous thing that happens, and chanting and frustrating, and just, so congratulations to you for endeavoring on that journey.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege. It's definitely a responsibility, but it's really fun I don't know. Every parent, I guess, thinks it, but we just think this little girl is just the specialest little thing there ever was. So,
and isn't it great that your daughter is in a house where that is the case? Because I'll tell you, one of the things that came from this, as I get emails from obviously so many more people, but
Mm-hmm.
you get emails from people who have been raised in situations where what you just said about your daughter is definitely not the case.
Yeah.
And and you begin to have an appreciation for just how fortunate your little girl is, even though lots of bad things will happen. I mean,
Sure.
and you as parents at some point will look back and say, oh, did we mess up in some of these areas?
Sure.
You will.
Sure. Well, and in some sense, I'm trying to be pragmatic about this stuff. And that's maybe a reason Peterson I've been drawn to him is he's very pragmatic in different things. And I'm sort of entering into this with the understanding that I'm not going to do everything right. We are going to make mistakes. And to some extent, that's okay. It's just how it is. But we're just sort of doing the best job we can and being very conscious, like you said, that it's not the things it's not just the things we say. She's learning from us constantly, right? So the way when I come home and I come and give my wife a hug and a kiss, and this little 11-month-old girl is seeing that's having an impact. All of these things. I remember my mom asked me a question a few months ago. She said, hey, do you remember when we were kids and I did, such and such thing? And I said, no, I don't have any memory of that. But that doesn't mean that just because I don't remember it right now as a 35-year-old, that doesn't mean that it was a waste. That those things, even if just in my little conscious mind, I can't remember, it doesn't mean that didn't have dramatic impacts on the person that I became and am becoming, right? So that's definitely something that we're sort of keeping in mind. So just just Peterson's notion of just sort of aiming for the highest good and the idea that everything we do does matter and does have an impact. Those things are very, very, I don't know, some people can find that stressful, but I find it very fulfilling. I mean, speaking of this meaning crisis discussion that we're sort of having, that's very impactful, that everything that I do today can have lasting impact. The way that I treat this little girl, the way I make sure I'm getting exercise so that, I physically am healthy and my mind is healthy, and maybe there's little things that I would get irritated about, maybe I don't get so irritated, all these different things. And it's all just teeny little incremental changes, but it all has value ultimately, which is something that is helpful and motivating from a day-to-day perspective too, right?
Yep.
Yeah. There's any number of directions we go. I've got a little list of notes in front of me here, and we're definitely not going to get to all of them. One thing maybe, I don't know if to get your thoughts on it is a good way to phrase it or not, but I in my mind for the last quite some time, I've sort of been having a dialogue with Dallas Willard, Jordan Peterson, and N.T. Wright, sort of in conversation, or not even in conversation, but those three have. That
would be a fun conversation.
It would, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
That would be an interesting conversation. So I see that they all three of them sort of overlapping, at least for me, at least in where I've been over the last while. So N.T. Wright, I mean, getting back to my questioning everything, what do we mean by this resurrection stuff? How's that pop? All this stuff. I have his Resurrection of the Son of God book, but golly, that's not the easiest book to get through. And I ain't the best. I'm more of an Audible guy, and there's no audio book now.
There's no audio, but every book should have an audio book.
I know.
That's my belief.
Totally. But N.T., I've obviously listened to a lot of his stuff through Unbelievable and Ask N.T. Wright, and I caught most of his Gifford lectures last year and whatnot. And so anyway, so him giving some foundation to the notion of resurrection and that's a reasonable thing to think about. But then more specifically, what does it mean to be a Christian in my head growing up? Well, you believe in Jesus, and when you die, you go to heaven, right? You go to heaven. And so N.T. Wright has been very helpful for me in, again, getting to low resolution, high resolution. That's fine, right? It's fine to say die and go to heaven. But that almost gets detached and becomes the thing. You die.
That's right.
And then you go up to heaven.
Right.
And very much God too, very much, this sort of ethereal in the cloud, whatever. And so And that was very much the sense that I had. So him coming in and saying, no, you know, and nothing that anyone in the church would disagree with, but just saying, no, resurrection bodies, you know, renewal of heaven and earth, you know, this whole thing. That is what we mean by go die and go to heaven. So that was just something that I in some sense hadn't really heard put so clearly, because I just sort of, you know, you grow up in the church and heaven, and, you know, it's even in the worship songs, all this stuff, you just sort of take it in, right?
Yep.
And the low resolution notion becomes the totality of how what the thing is. So anyway, so him, and then you've got Dallas Willard. I've only read The Divine Conspiracy, and by read I mean listen.
Oh, that's right. That one is an audiobook.
It is. Yeah, listen to that.
I read it years ago. I read it when it first came out, and and it just, boy, that book just grabbed me. Yeah. And I'm going to be preaching. I'm going to be preaching in the. I'm going to be preaching through the Sermon on the Mount soon, and or at least parts of it. And that's, I remember.
You'll be tapping into him.
Yeah, it just kind of grabbed me.
Yeah. So thinking about pragmatics and the importance of how we are to act, maybe upping the resolution from the WWJD kind of, you know, just language that we might use, like him coming in and talking about, and I'm probably going to butcher it. It's been a while since I've read the book, but him just sort of talking about sort of the things that we do kind of having an impact in the bringing forth of the kingdom. And I should probably review it so I could kind of talk a little bit more about it. But so I had N.T. Wright in my ear talking about the renewal of heaven and earth and the resurrection bodies. And then you've got Dallas Willard coming in saying the things that we do can have a lasting impact, and, you know, all of this sort of stuff. Him kind of using Christian language. And now you've got Jordan Peterson over here, talking about, you know, all this standard stuff, the things that we do have value, the equilibrated state, the importance of, you know, the things that you know, what's in my best interest is in my best interest today, but tomorrow, the next day, and the week after. And it also needs to scale to my wife and our daughter and the people around, all of that stuff.
Yep.
But he has struggles to ground it in something that we would consider bedrock, right? But then those two guys are coming in, and so I just felt, for me, that putting those three guys together was really helpful in a kind of boots on the ground way of providing some meaning and kind of direction, in some sense, of how but we as believers ought to act in a little bit more concrete way, maybe. Sorry, I'm doing a lot of
that's good. That's good. And I like the three because N.T. Wright is a historian, New Testament scholar, you know, obviously has his own sort of take. And if you read his books, you know, a guy writes so many books. Yeah. But if, like, I remember when, was it Simply Christian? I remember when that came out, and that was supposed to be sort of his attempt at mere Christianity, Simply Christian. But I appreciate Wright for the historical stuff. I've got so many of his books, and I use he's got commentaries on like the whole New Testament, and they're almost devotionals. And so often if I'm preparing a sermon, I'll just pull up his commentary and read through, because it's just like a devotional in a sense. And so you can get a sense of Wright's, of kind of the feel of his faith from the inside. And that's not really, for me, where I really kind of sync with Wright. Dallas Willard, you know, now that I'm a little bit more familiar with Husserl and, you know, where he comes at things philosophically, Dallas Willard just comes at Christianity from a layman's point of view in a very fresh, rigorous, applicable way to make Christianity very tangible in one's real life. Yeah. And that's sort of Willard's strength. And then, of course, Peterson, like you say, you're going to get lots of practical wisdom and I use wisdom sort of in the Old Testament general revelation stuff from Peterson. Clean your room. He's the uncle who is telling the nephew, it's very Book of Proverbs-ish.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Mm-hmm.
really Peterson. And so they're a fun 3 people to get together early on, right after I'd done my conversation with Peterson. I was immediately contacted by a friend of N.T. Wright's, and then put in contact with N.T. Wright and asked him, would you like to talk to Jordan? He said, I'd love to talk to Jordan. So then I contacted Jordan and said, Jordan, would you like to talk to Tom Wright? I'd love to talk to Tom Wright. And I wanted both of them to read each other's books first, because I've watched enough conversations on YouTube to know that that's right. 2 people come into that was sort of Alistair McGrath and Brett Weinstein. Neither of them knew each other very well. So, and then it's kind of a missed opportunity. But, later N.T. Wright was a little frustrated because it's like, at that point, Jordan Peterson was riding his status rocket. And so the conversation never happened. My hope and prayer is that Jordan will at some point be able to sort of re-enter the public conversation. My hope is that he's not too distracted with all of the more political culture war stuff. And I would love to see he and Tom Wright have a conversation. So I'd really love to have Dallas Willard in that mix, but of course,
passed away. Yeah.
Dallas Willard has gone to glory. So it'll have to be a little Peter Kreeft, book that puts people together in conversation.
Totally. I wanted to talk a little bit about Providence, but probably more about Logos. So actually at church, we're doing, me and actually a good friend of mine, we are table leaders at our men's Bible study at church. And we're going through the Gospel of John last semester and this semester. So we just started last week, John 13, I guess, which then made me think, I should probably watch all your Sunday school stuff on John. But then I went to the church page and thought, you're going through really slowly, which I like a lot.
Really slowly.
But also, it's like, oh no, there's that much content I got to go through too. And there's so many things.
I've probably got audio recordings of my Sunday school class back to 2011. We spent 75 weeks in the book of Revelation. I know, and that would kill any Sunday school class, but these people in this Sunday school class, they're bulletproof. They don't give up.
That's amazing.
Isaiah almost killed some of them. So.
I bet. I haven't. I'm very much taking an approach of there's nearly an infinite amount of things that for me to get to, and my job is not to do it all right now. So Isaiah, trying to get a handle on Revelation, that stuff I haven't even started yet, and it's not even on my list at this point. Down there, I'm only 35. Hopefully, I got a lot of years ahead of me. I'm gonna get there at some point, but for now, I'm taking things one piece at a time, starting, I guess, in the Gospels, I suppose. Yeah. But so getting back to like growing up in the church, and you've got a similar background that way. All of this stuff. Well, one thing that I think Jordan Peterson and this whole sort of corner of the internet has done is, at least for me, it's felt like it's sort of like breathed life into a lot of the Christian thought that when you grow up in it, it just sort of is just always there, and it's just sort of almost a little bit flat. Does that make sense? Like, I don't, no convergence.
Perfect sense.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So he was really helpful to me in breathing some life into that. Not just him, like I say, other people. But so, for example, like, what's a classic Sunday school answer of what it is to be a Christian? Believe in Jesus, love Jesus, trust, act like Jesus, all these different things. And again, you pull a David Fuller and say, hey, what do you mean by that? And well, I don't know what any of that means. I don't know, act like a dude from the first century that was in the Middle East, like, or love that. Okay, I'm trying my hardest to love this dude from 2,000 years ago that I don't really know, but and you're a 12-year-old or a 20-year-old or a 35-year-old thinking, I don't know how to do this necessarily. Like, in some senses, and then in other senses, it just, possibly part of why I would consider myself a Calvinist too, is that even though I'm levying some of these questions and critiques, I seem to just believe it. It seems there's something that's drawing me that way. So anyway, I want to say that. But I know other people have talked about it before, and I don't mean to lean on Peterson too much, but when he started talking about logos and his dichotomy of chaos and order, and at least the way I'm poorly going to unpack his definition of logos is like this ability to create habitable order from chaotic potential, let's say. And so then you get to, the Gospel of John, and John 1, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. So, okay. So now I'm doing this Bible study at church. No one's mentioned Logos once. And as we went through the first half of John, I'm looking at it through this idea of this superordinate principle that is almost the emanation of all that is true. All that is true and right comes from the Logos, God, Jesus, whatever language we want to use, and through that came all of being. I don't know what we'd say. Came into being, let's say. And then, like, I think you used the language in the past of that we are, another thing that we all in church just sort of nod along to is, we're made in the image of God. Yep. Don't know what that, again, there's all of these things. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. But that I think you used the language of that we're sub-creators, and that, Peterson's verbiage of we have a spark of divinity. We have this ability to look at chaotic potential and convert it into habitable order, whether that be, I converted our 2x4 exposed 2x4 stud garage into a fully finished gym that, so I walked into that space and I saw the chaos that it was, and through, I don't know, I saw what it could be, right? And so I think you used the example of, if a dog comes running into the room and starts barking away, and then somebody comes in and said, it's chaos, what's going on? And somebody says, oh, no, don't worry about it. That's just my dog. He's a little silly. He's not going to do anything. It's all good. I've used that metaphor when talking about this with a few people because I thought that was really helpful. So anyway, I'm sorry, I was unpacking Logos a little bit, but so getting back to how me as a Christian ought to act, well, follow Jesus. Well, okay, if you kind of tease out what that means a little bit more, to Jesus is Logos and the origin of all truth and how things ought to be, all through at least the first half of the Gospel of John. He's saying, I'm the way, the truth, and the light. Or, there's all of these references that when I'm kind of thinking about this idea of Logos, I'm seeing it everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm the light of the world. Through following Jesus, then I can see things as they really are. All of these. That's right. But if you just say, well, just follow this dude from 2,000 years ago, and nobody is necessarily explicitly saying that. That's sort of what implicitly kind of low resolution, at least I, as just one random person within evangelicalism, just sort of absorbed this low resolution notion of, well, you got to love this guy, and he did these things, and which, by the way, if you think about the things he did, the resurrection and whatnot, they're kind of big asks, and all these, just believe it all and just follow. I would just be sitting there thinking, I don't know what to do with this. Like, on one hand, I'm kind of nodding along, and honestly do have a sense that this is right, but also in another sense, none of it makes any sense to me.
Yeah.
And so it's for me been really helpful to think of Jesus, not eliminate in my mind the works of Jesus in the first century Middle East, but overlaying that with this concept of Logos and what that looks like and what that means, for me, has really sort of, again, breathed life into all of this stuff and kind of set off, light bulbs in my mind. So anyway, I kind of just wanted to throw that out there and see what you thought of it.
Oh, I think that's
wandering into heresy.
No,
I don't think I
no,
am,
I think you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, because, and you know, I loved David Fuller's honesty in terms of telling that story to Andrea, because it's exactly what it's like. And it's not just, you know, so David Fuller was raised a Methodist, and then, you know, he, one way or another, he winds up in this crazy little church in Sacramento, California, watching this pastor, you know, do his shtick. And, but we all have those experiences. And there's so much sleepwalking through the church. No, we ought not to be sleepwalking through the church. And, you know, I know, you know, when I started listening to John Vervaeke stuff, I had exactly that experience that, okay, John's, you know, John's not a Christian in the way that you and I are Christians. He's coming at things from a very different perspective, but he's bringing tools and language that help me to understand what's going on with different eyes. And Jordan Peterson did that too. And Dallas Willard did that. And N.T. Wright has done that. That's the process of learning. I mean, you're always taking mapped territory and unexplored territory and continuing to integrate or up the resolution. And that's that living function that you're doing is so vitally important for your continued growth, because, you know, when I was in the Dominican Republic, the educational methodology there was to a certain degree pre-modern. It was rote memorization for the people. And given that context, that's not a bad thing, because the Haitians, they could at any minute be grabbed, put on a truck, dumped at the Haitian border, you know, very little stability in life. And, you know, one of my missionary mentors said, we want to give the people stuff they can put in their head, because it doesn't matter what gets taken away from it. If it's between their ears, it's there. So, okay. But in the context we're in, especially in a context of rapid change, if you're actually going to be able to do the translating, let's say, from this church language, and as all of the contextual things change, you're going to have a much deeper understanding of what's eliciting that church language, so that when the language keeps changing, you can say it in the new language. And that's a vital skill for the future of the church. And I mean, right away when we started, you said, you know, oh, heresy. That is always heresy is a ever-present danger in that process. But as you know, Sam, the biblical Unitarian, who read Alistair McGrath's book Heresy and said, well, I don't know if you're reading the book right, but you've probably got a better take on it. And that's probably true, because I read the book, and sometimes somewhat like, you know, you know, I was telling Nancy today, I had lunch with Nancy and Freddie today, because it's their birthday. They both had birthdays. The birthdays are very close. So I took them both out to lunch.
There you go.
And
Nancy's Freddie's mom?
Nancy's Freddie's mom.
Okay. Yeah.
And I told Nancy, I said, you know, Nancy, hearing your sermon report is really helpful for me, because I'm up there preaching, and the sermon's one thing in my head, and it's coming out my mouth, but something's going in Nancy's ear and, you know, passing around in her head. And then the thing that comes out of her mouth, well, that gives me an indication of, you know, because as a preacher, I'm not only responsible for making sure I'm theologically correct in terms of what I'm telling the church, but it's got to be in a way that actually penetrates and produces good fruit.
Sure.
So that work that you're doing is the work of the church, and a vital service to your church and to your small group, because I mean, and hopefully, I mean, the reason that we do small groups in church is so that, you know, we can take stuff, and whereas in the main worship service, your pastor is, you know, spreading something out there for all of you to see. Well, in the small groups, it's supposed to all get, you know, chewed. And that chewing process means, oh, you know, some things but you're grinding it up and you're putting into little things and you're taking it apart and you're reknitting it together. And that's a vitally important thing for the overall health of the church in a context where change is rapid. And yes, there will be heresy, but heresy and orthodoxy sort of co-develop as we go through time. We've seen that in church history. And so we trust the Holy Spirit that in this process, I mean, that's really what Protestantism is about, in this process, that canon will be helpful for continuing to help Christians figure out how to live. And that's the work of the church, and that's the work that you're doing. And, you know, I think it's helpful evangelistically, and but even just for the ongoing evangelism that happens in each of us, that we do this work. And so listening to Jordan Peterson or John Vervaeke or Dallas Willard or N.T. Wright, doing all of that is the work we ought to be doing. That's my take.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. That's helpful. I remember when I've always been a bit of a skeptic in some sense of Christianity from within, in some sense. You know, people historically, oh, you know, God led me to go here, or you know, I was just getting a sense that I should leave the house today, and well, you know, whatever the thing. And I'm always kind of like, yeah, okay, I don't know what to do with that historically, but in some roundabout way, actually, Esther's quote that T.S. Eliot quote that she said to what the heck's his name on the N.T. Wright, or on the Unbelievable show, Douglas Murray, about searching and finding what you were searching for back at the beginning, or whatever that was. Yeah, that kind of, even though I butchered the quote just now, that spoke to me in some sense, because I think in part because of your God one, like the teasing out the God 1 and God 2 stuff has been really helpful, because when and I think probably during the biblical lecture series, when Peterson was talking about, you know, where do thoughts come from? Well, it just popped into my head. And I said, well, that's not a very scientific answer. And it's well, immediately now, you know, I'm thinking, I'm just trying to figure out how to put all this stuff together. We talk about the Holy Spirit and providence, and you know, when he said that, it just popped into my head, these thoughts. And then I think, yeah, what do we mean when we say the Holy Spirit was calling me to do this or leading me here? I just had a sense that, you know, a friend of mine just donated a kidney last month. And he just always had a sense like that was something that he should do. He knew he had the blood type O or whatever that's compatible with lots of people. And he just sort of had a sense that maybe that was a thing for him. And then somebody in this small group needed a kidney. And he said, oh, I might be able to give you one. And he just did it. And It's like, yeah, a heck of a thing to do. And so I look at that now more, and I have much more open posture, I suppose, to, well, consciousness is another thing we don't really talk about in the church. But what do we mean by the Holy Spirit was leading? The Holy Spirit was leading him to do that. Okay, is maybe what we would say. And even as I say those things, I kind of cringe because it just sounds so Christian-y to me. But I affirm it. I agree with it. But I was wondering, yeah, well, what do we mean by that? Well, I don't know. Just trying to. And now, because that dude donated a kidney, that doesn't mean that I have to donate a kidney, or that, you know, because one posture that can happen is, oh, look at all these things other people are doing. I should be doing maybe some of that, or maybe I should be. And I guess one response is, well, yeah, maybe you should be. But in another sense, like you said, I like bringing it back to me. I do seem to have an interest or a frustration with some of the way we use language and trying to understand and dig up new ways of discussing things that make sense in our context. So, and I don't know why I have those desires or that interest or those proclivities. However, we've got this Holy Spirit conversation alongside that. Well, and so now more than ever, I feel more of a sense of not understanding it, because I definitely don't understand it, but a sense of, okay, I'm kind of have some sense of maybe what we mean when we say some of these sorts of things. Yep. He just always had a sense that he should, maybe he could donate something sometime. And then a situation presented itself, and he said, oh, there it is. Okay, yep. I'll go that way. I have a sense I should go that way. Yep. And so I guess my point is I have a much more open posture towards the notion of providence and what we mean when we say that. And it's very much in part due to the God One stuff has been super helpful to me. Bearded guy up in the clouds just saying, oh, you should do that and you should do that. There's this things, coming from the bottom. I think Peugeot talked about, maybe in that Vervaeke interview, we talked about, listen, if you treat your wife poorly and you cheat on her and you do all of these things, and then she leaves you and your family breaks down, that's, we could say that's providential. That's there's a ideal mode of being, and if you're not in line with that, things are going to happen as a result. Yeah. And we can easily, and I would be like, yeah, but that's just because you treated your wife bad, and you probably shouldn't do that, and that's why that happened. Just sort of explaining it all away. But it's like, yeah, you can explain it, but it doesn't get underneath of why are things the way that they are.
Yep.
Why, so I guess I'm just sort of talking this stuff out. And
that's cool. That's what you gotta do.
I don't know.
Well, that's what I do. That's what I do for hours, and people listen to it. And I mean, people always thank me, and I should be thanking you people for listening and giving me feedback back, because I see, especially the videos where I'm just talking to the computer or making commentary, I see that as enormously selfish, because I have to talk this stuff out in order to figure it out. And it's often in the midst of a video that I think about something and learn it. And I never would have thought about it if I didn't do the video. So
totally. Yeah. So I love your conversations with people, but your dialogue videos are equally helpful. And this process of, just like you say, talking is thinking, right?
Yep, talking is thinking. And that's a Peterson thing. I mean, Peterson was saying that in one of his lectures on some video. I heard it. Was like,
who knows?
Yeah, that's really true. That's really true. Mm-hmm. And I also feel a little rude in terms of my videos, because Vervaeke and Peugeot are having a good conversation. So shoot, I want to get in the middle of that conversation. So I make a video where I plot my big nose in, and it's
it's good. I wouldn't want you to stop.
Yeah, well, I'm not about to stop. I just told the last guy, I mean, for every video I make, I have 10 in my head, and it's like,
oh, I can only imagine.
Yeah, and it's probably, I already make too many videos, but.
I wouldn't say that.
Well, I don't know.
I don't know all the ones you don't post, I suppose, but.
Yeah. Well, actually, they don't get made because they just, just 1 second, it's like, boy, I want to make a video with this and this and this, and I want to work on this idea, but I just don't have time to sit down and make that video. And it's like, okay, I look at my schedule. Okay, I've got a few hours here. I can make a video. So then I make a video. Or a few hours here, I can plan a video. And then that's how my process works. But I have to run. I don't have a lot of extra time tonight.
Yeah, no worries, man. I really appreciate it. I don't know. I've kind of already said what I got to say, and to some extent, I'm sure things could go on in different directions. But yeah, it's strange to, after 2 years of watching you on that TV screen behind me, it's strange to have you sitting here on my phone dialoguing back and forth. So
honey, the TV's talking back.
Yeah.
It's like, honey,
totally.
Let's go talk to the doctor.
I can't say my wife has been all that interested in the hours of dialogue that she hears in the background, but.
That's not an uncommon thing.
No.
I remember when we first started our meetup, and one of the things was, I'm listening to all this Jordan Peterson, and I wanted to talk to my wife about it. And my wife's like, I don't want to talk about any of this stuff. I mean, find someone else to talk about. I'm sick of hearing Jordan Peterson. Find somebody else. So they all came to the meetup.
Yeah, well, try and find conversation partners for this stuff. You just got to listen to 100 hours of Peterson, and it doesn't hurt if you take an in for Vervaeke, and here's Jonathan Peugeot, figure that stuff out, and all. Yeah, it's not easy to find conversation partners necessarily. I will say, as just before we go, I'm really looking forward to you coming to Vancouver in March. I will definitely be there. That'll be really cool.
Well, good. So, I'm looking forward to it too, and I know already that this trip will in some ways be frustrating because I get to meet you, and what I'd love to do is just sit down and do another hour with you, but there's going to be 5 or 10 of you in the room. It's going to be like, oh, so, and my goal, I mean, I've said this before, but the most gratifying, lately I haven't spent a lot of time on the Discord server. I usually hop on, I do some scrolling in some of the different forums, and I look at some of the conversations every now and then. I'll drop in, but
there's a lot going on in that server.
Yeah, there is. But it's gratifying to see the conversations. And even though Peterson has sort of been, absent for the last 6 or 7 months, new meetups keep starting. Yeah. And that to me is so amazing because, this isn't just sort of being pushed by Peterson. This is organically coming up and people saying, we need to have conversation. We need to be in relationship. We need to establish community, and we need to meet together with a degree of regularity. What are we going to talk about? We don't know, but we know when we get together that we will find things to talk about, and we will build community together. And that's happening. And for me, that's the most gratifying thing. But and as many people have told me, you've already got a church, you've already got a community, you already have a small group. Now you have these weird people from the internet talking in your ear, and maybe the people around the table in your church aren't there, but there's enough of a connection, which, so in many ways, you're already well situated and well blessed. But
yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. You tend to see the things that you see the holes in your game more than you see all of the blessings and all the things that are working really, really well. But yeah, that's definitely the case.
So I've got this recorded. I can send this to you to proof it first, or
you can post it if you want to.
Okay.
100%.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
I mean, like I said, I found the conversations you've had with so many people so valuable, and hearing these different perspectives. And all I knew about the Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox from my little evangelical silo was they're all wrong, and what we're doing is what's right.
That's right.
So hearing these different voices is like, oh, okay, I see that perspective. Oh, that so it's been really helpful. So if anyone would find this helpful, then by all means, post the thing.
All right. Well, thank you, Jesse. Well, this has been a pleasure, and I look forward to shaking your hand
you bet,
in Vancouver.
Too. Yeah, sounds good. Thanks a lot, Paul. I appreciate it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night.